Alright, moving on from India into Southeast Asia. Well, first of all, does anybody have any comments about India? If you want to say something, if you know something else different from what I'm saying, the floor is open. Now, Southeast Asia is a lot like the United States in one regard. It was a melting pot of a lot of different peoples. They got people from China, India, Indonesia, the Philippines, melting pot of races and a melting pot of religions. And they should have, if they could have united, who knows what they could have, because the United States is a melting pot, wound up becoming a really great nation because this group had this to contribute, and that group had that to contribute, and every group contributed a little bit to making the country great. But in the case of Southeast Asia, they were never able to unite, partly because they were separated by oceans, seas, and mountains. A typical Southeast Asian island has some very, very rugged, tall mountains and some very, very dense rainforest. And folks, as we're going into these rainforests, even in the year 2015, we're finding new species of plants and animals that we did not know existed, new types of amphibians, new types of reptiles, and even some rodents, mammals that we're finding we did not even know existed or that we thought were extinct for millions of years. And all of a sudden, there it is, very much alive and well. People would move by traveling in the valleys between the mountains, owing to the fact that travel across the mountains was very difficult. Never has been unified. I doubt that even Alexander the Great could have unified them, because he had to go over these mountains and through the valleys and across the oceans, and Alexander was whatever else he was hardly a Navy man. They had all kinds of language, many and numerous different languages. And again, that kept them from uniting. It's believed that the people who moved in came in waves. The most complex region in the world with more languages than any other comparable region on earth. The Malay are the earliest people we know about. They were the first wave. Then came another wave around about 1,000 years later. The Indian merchants came in, and they were followed by Buddhist and Hindu missionaries. Because primitive people tend to be egalitarian more than a lot of civilized people, Hinduism, with its emphasis on caste, did not make as much headway in this region as Buddhism did, with its emphasis more on egalitarianism. But, now, folk, I'm debating now because I didn't realize this course would go by so quickly. I mean, hardly. I'm debating leaving off what I said about giving you a test on comparative religions and comparative civilizations, owing to the fact it's just not going to have any time I can teach you. But one thing, though, that I want to state, some religions seem to be more for primitive peoples, particularly animism, shamanism, more for primitive, and voodooism, and more for primitive peoples, while other religions are more for civilized peoples. And the primitive peoples who initially lived in Southeast Asia were what we call animistic, nature worshippers. When they saw the Hindu people coming in with their finer clothes and wealth and their nicer civilization, a lot of them said, hey, their religion is better. So they adopted the religion of the Indian people, especially Buddhism, until Buddhism became the dominant religion of the, I have to say this, civilized people of Southeast Asia. The people living along the coast, the people living in cities tended to become Buddhist. The people living deep in the jungle remain animistic, and this has gone in a lot to this day. Some of them these people became more, yes?
Was this all still on the islands, or was this?
Still, either, well, not all just the islands. I'm talking about Indonesia, but also Vietnam, Malaysia, what's the Malay Peninsula?
So this is all over the Southeast Asia?
They're all over the Southeast Asia. Vietnam, Cambodia, what's the name? Myanmar. Used to be called Thailand, now called Myanmar. And as well as the islands, including the Philippines, not Japan, but including the Philippines. Now, I must also say this about tropical versus temperate climate people. in general, people who live in a temperate climate have tended to be more industrious and more advanced than people who live in tropical climates. Now, I know some of you might be from a tropical climate, hopefully no offense taken, but people who live in the, and I'm not going to try to say why that is, but part of it might be that in a tropical climate, you can plant a crop anytime you want to and harvest it whenever you're ready to, whereas in a temperate climate, you have to plant. You have a really small, narrow window of opportunity when you can plant. You've got to plant right then, even if it's Sunday. Like, for instance, my sister who lives in Ohio talked about one year, a couple years back, where the farmers were worried, oh, it's been raining. We can't plow this wet, muddy ground. It's the word of muddy. Finally, they got a day or two when it was dry, and they had to plow even though it was on Sunday. But I mean, if they figured out, if we don't plow right today, our crops will never be able to ripen before the first frost. So you always have a certain window, small window of time when you can plant, and then a small window when you can harvest. And you're forced to work, in other words, in order to survive. Now, in our own country, we experienced a starving time in Virginia and another one in Massachusetts, where our people, the Europeans, did not know how to live here in this country, and half of them starved to death the first winter, both in Virginia and Massachusetts. And they go, oops, we gotta become industrial. We gotta plant at a certain time. We gotta harvest at a certain time. But generally, tropical peoples, they're somewhat more laid back and more passive. All right. I've got to be careful how I say that. I mean, because I know we have all kinds of folk in here, and of the 18 of you who are left, 15 here, and I've got to be sensitive what I say, but nevertheless, I mean, just the facts, folks, is what I'm trying to stick to, just the facts. Now, Angkor was a big city in Thailand, sometimes known as Angkor Wat, that was abandoned, as so many cities have. And one reason, folks, and this will be, I believe, will be on the test, depending on which test I wind up giving you the next. But one reason that some people believe that Angkor was abandoned was that first their kings were Hindu. And as long as their kings were Hindu, that made them somewhat energetic. Then their kings became Buddhist, and Buddhism emphasized just accept what is, what will be, you can't do anything about it anyway. So their kings became less energetic. Their enemies from outside began to harass them, and finally they just realized, we can't live in this great city anymore. And for 400 years, nobody lived there, even though some natives said, oh, there's a big, big city in the jungle. And one day a European explorer stumbled on it. There was this totally abandoned city. A 4-foot-long black snake slithered across the street. He left it alone. A tiger peered its head out of a doorway, but when the tiger saw him, it jumped back inside the house. Of course, the explorer did not go investigate any farther. He went back and told his fellow Europeans, say, I found this big city, and gave the location. They went, and yes, there it was. And the Europeans began to study it. I do have a video of it, but I don't have time to show it here now, but I did show it to one class one time. But anyway, the people in Angkor abandoned their city and went to live in what is today Phnom Penh. Malaysia, again, it looked like that for a while that they were not united into a single state, but don't worry about that name. The book does mention a kingdom, and I'm not going to try to pronounce it. Eventually, though, Indonesia was able to be united by a great conqueror, in spite of the fact it consists of several islands. A great conqueror united them, and they have remained united to this day. Now, for a time, Indonesia was conquered by the Dutch. They were called the Dutch East Indies. But then the Dutch gave them up after World War II. Their main contribution to the rest of humanity has been spices and rice. They were the ones who exported most spices to India and China and eventually to Europe. Their religion, as was the case of a lot of people, began with animism, but then they moved to Buddhism and Hinduism, owing to the fact that animism seems to keep its people primitive, not just make its people primitive, but keep them primitive. Again, this summary is something I got straight out of one of the older books. India believed in unification, but could not unite, tried to unite. They had a traditional faction called the War of the Fishes, war for the big fish gobbles up the little fish, big fish gobbles the little fish, and this keeps on going on and on forever with no end in sight. Southeast Asia, a lot of diversity, but never able to unite, and they might have become another United States if they'd had the same religion or a similar religion, similar language, similar religion, similar language, and somebody who would have been able to unite them, but they couldn't. India influenced Southeast Asia more than China, except for Vietnam. Again, you look on the map, and you can see why China was facing Vietnam. So China had a lot of influence in Vietnam, but other than that, China did not influence Southeast Asia as much as India did. All right.